Welcome back to the Deep Plea. This episode is on consciousness. My name is Karthik. The guy on the other side of the mic is Sven.
Hello,
This might
hello.
be one of his favorite topics, so I'll let
Yeah.
him start with the quote for today. Sven, take it away.
As Einstein put it, time and space are modes by which we think, and not conditions in which we live. Donald Hoffman in his book, The Case Against Reality. So, overall, this quote is going to be representing the difference between objective reality and subjective reality because we have sensory organs that have senses that pick up our environment around us. So, when we talk about space and time, we're talking about things that we've evolved in senses to pick up and to use to survive in our surroundings. A good analogy for this, if you think about like some alien civilization, and they kind of evolved to use gravitational waves to maneuver themselves around their planet or whatever, they're going to develop their own systems of measurements using that sensory organ to pick up the gravity, and that's going to be something that we can't see, but to them that's their reality, and that's how they navigate. And animals, salmon, they have what's it called, magnetic poles, like sensories, so they can kind of direct themselves using those things, and we don't have that. So when people say that we have our own reality that we're living in, and this is the right reality, the idea is that it's actually just your senses picking up the reality based on evolutionary pressures over time, and that's kind of what gives us our reality. That's not technically base reality, but I will say I don't think there's a base reality because you need a sensory organ to pick up an environment, and that sensory organ can't somehow just be the right one or like the most correct one. What do you think?
That sounded pretty complicated, so I'm just gonna try I'm just trying, the way I thought about it was, uh, time and space are modes by which we think, so maybe that part of the quote means that the way we understand the world as humans, right? And our
Yeah,
frame of consciousness and our worldview, we understand four dimensions. We understand three-dimensional space and then time stacked on top of that.
yeah,
But perhaps Einstein is alluding to the idea that there's something more, right? If we look beyond the horizon and if we try and contemplate the reasons in which we think that time and space are the modes by which we do think, then perhaps we can advance our civilization. I mean, there's research into consciousness, um, which we'll
yeah.
get into slightly here. Um, it's a very complex field, and I don't know if I think I was a little confused by what you said, so I think
Yeah, I can.
I would, yeah, throw it back to you for a little bit more
Yeah,
elaboration.
yeah, yeah. So basically, the idea is we have sensory organs, and they pick up our environment around us. And these sensory organs are only unique to us as human beings. Some animals have similar sensory organs, and some have completely different ones. But to them, their reality is completely like what we would say reality is to us is, for them, like some animals see the different spectrums of light. So the idea is that we have an interface that is kind of between the what processes information in our brain and then what is observing that processed information. So when you have a smell coming into your nose and that it's traveling along the axons through the synaptic terminals, getting into your brain, after that information is processed, there's a consciousness that is actually getting that process information and is having an experience. And from what most physicists say, it is not computational. They have not found any computational way of describing the observer or whatever it is in the brain that is doing that. So I think what the quote is kind of representing is that with our senses, we've developed these concepts that work in our reality, such as space and time, because that's the way evolution allowed us to survive. That's kind of the idea of that.
Yeah, or perhaps we think that, like, okay, we have some type of qualia, which is like a subjective experience, and
Yeah.
we think that it goes through the space in our brain and the time, firing through neurons, and we think that there's some formula to that, but we
Right.
haven't figured it out, right? So maybe it's
Yeah.
something more, right?
Right.
So it can be, like how I said earlier, looking beyond the horizon. So let's
Right. Or
get
like,
into our,
yeah.
or
Yeah.
sorry, go
No, I
ahead.
was gonna say the reason or the way it differs is because like my redness of how red something is and your redness, like the way
Yes,
like
yeah.
that whole thing. Yeah,
hmm
that's kind of how you differentiate between people's realities. That's why it's subjective.
Yeah. Let's get into
Yeah.
our easy question for today. Can consciousness evolve? So before the episode, me and Sven had differing viewpoints. So I'll start with mine. Uh, at least from a first glance and a little bit of research, I had thought yes. And from again David Hoffman on the Lex Friedman podcast, he says consciousness arises from orchestrated collapse of quantum states of microtubules in neurons.
Hmm.
So it's a huge statement there to unpack, but I think what it's trying to say is that you have these fundamental like quantum levels, whether that's quarks, and I think there are some other things in there that kind of process your subjective experience. And what I was thinking with evolving would be that over time, right? So we start with agriculture maybe, and then or hunter-gatherer, and then we start with agriculture, and we have these different experiences and different qualia, such that we're kind of evolving our consciousness to kind of understand new situations and experiences. So, can there be more quantum states over a period of time with new experiences? And then, if we see these new experiences in different ways, like if we see virtual reality and we have some type of different experiences, is the kind of consciousness evolving to see beyond the horizon? Sven, what do you have to say?
Yes. So first off, I think that when we think about evolution, we look at the universe, we look at stars, galaxies. They don't really evolve from what we know. They always have been, stars, galaxies. These things have always been. However, on Earth with life, we have had things evolve and change over time. However, consciousness and the way I define it is just that the lights are on. It's just simply the lights are on. There's some sort of
Okay.
experience happening. And I think, of course, you need a sensory organ to pick up that experience. So when you're saying that you have all these new experiences, I think what you're saying is like the brain is getting more information. But the thing is, the consciousness is the observer. It's not the brain adapting and getting more information, like the availability of it. Because no matter what, the observing of it is the consciousness. And I think that will always just stay, what it is, even if we have developed more capacities to our brain and more information processes. Um, yeah,
Okay.
it's
Let me
yeah, you know
ask
what I
you,
mean?
let me ask you a maybe weird question. If some person had no senses, they can see, they can hear, they can feel, would they be conscious? I guess in the sense that like you have this observer observing things, and if you're not observing things, like for some reason if you don't have senses, are
Oh,
you
you're
a actor in your world or not?
you're unconscious, you mean, if someone's
No,
unconscious?
like if let's I this might be a impossible scenario, but if someone was like born without any senses, but they were like alive, kind of idea.
I mean, so it's like, so you mean there's not even senses that your heart's pumping, just like no experience at all?
I was thinking the five senses because that's how we perceive our
Okay.
world, kind of
Because
idea.
yeah, because I know like if you didn't have those five main senses, I guess there still would be. I guess I don't know if you how the sense of being is actually comes about. I think the more senses we have, the more interactive we can be with our consciousness. So I think that in order for you to have consciousness, you probably do need to have some sort of receptor to pick up some and things like something around you. But in order for you to actually be alive anyway, you would actually have to have that sense anyway. So it is kind of like this impossible question or like theoretical because the only way you'd be alive is if you had senses, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, I
That's
guess
it.
like if you had, you need some qualia, you need some subjective experience, and I
Yeah.
guess like so long as you were able to like breathe, that would be a subjective experience, I suppose. Um,
However, I do think what's interesting about this is that when you look at like a butterfly, for example, or like things in nature, you have a butterfly where their wings can actually mimic like a tiger's eye. So like predators would not want to go toward the butterfly, or you have chameleons that like blend in and stuff like that. And I feel like there's some level of like consciousness almost to evolution where it kind of like the animal knows, like it has to survive, but like it can't really put it in its own DNA like consciously by itself.
hmm
So it's kind of like because there's a dynamic between these animals in their ecosystems, just kind of subconsciously or without even trying, they just develop these things to keep them safer. A chameleon didn't evolve and say I want to change colors and like put it in a computer and beep up their DNA to do it. It just
Yeah.
happened. So it's almost like there is something a little bit more than the animal itself or the being itself. It seems that evolution is a very special thing. Um,
Yeah.
and it's
uh,
hard to describe.
Indeed, indeed. Let's get into our hard question of today, which might be even harder for me to describe. But is consciousness fundamental to space and time, or is it outside space and time? Sven, take it away.
Yes. So Donald Hoffman, who we've been discussing, he has this preface that, like we mentioned, because we have these sensory organs, I'll just kind of speed this up. This part that we perceive space and time because of those sensory organs. So the reason why he thinks that it's outside space and time is because there's no base reality that we could actually get to without having a sense. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to be able to pick up information, and the reason he thinks it's outside space and time is because you have to have a sensory organ in order to pick up anything to be within space and time. So he views it as like you have a computer screen and there's an icon, and it's just it's not that the icon is actually like there. Like when you click on the icon, the information is actually in your computer separate from your monitor if you have a desktop, for example, but we see it there and it's accessible to us. And like, for example, if it was food, we'd be like, okay, that's kind of the idea, is that it's just like this interface that we use to make things easier. um I kind of like, it's interesting to think about what base reality could be like in this way, because if you just imagine somehow just like the whole universe is just a bunch of atoms, and let's just say like light is a thing, we'd be kind of filling in all these gaps to kind of get ourselves around in the universe. Like you have light reflecting off of something, so then over time we've picked that up. It's like we kind of just use everything in a way that our senses can pick up in order to operate. And he thinks the observer aspect of that is not a part of that. The processing of the information by the brain isn't the same as the observer. They're not in the same plane.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? You get
that's
that?
the topic of emergentism, I believe I said that
Yes.
correctly. So
Yeah.
that's mainly saying the result of complex processes in the brain. So basically meaning that consciousness is like this sort of, I know how you said kind of it's not a formula, but we see something that's red, right? And we have some experience to that. And that's a result of neurons firing off, and eventually the end result is somehow red through the brain, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of geared towards the specific experiences that we have. And at least as humans, we can only really understand these four dimensions, right? We can only
Yeah.
understand the three dimensions, we can only understand time. And when we kind of put all those things together, when then we say, oh, we see this red image, it is this big, maybe it's a cube, and it's been sitting here for a minute or so.
Yeah.
Um, there's another side of that called phys,
Panpsychism.
panpsychism, thank you, which says that consciousness exists everywhere and is fundamental to all
Yeah.
experiences, similar to space and time. So that would mean it would kind of be outside space of time, existing
Right.
in different dimensions that we don't even know past the horizon. Alan Watts argues in the book, that's actually what it's called, just as no thing or organism exists on its own, it does not act on its own. So
Yeah.
this kind of means, or what he's arguing, is that nothing really exists uh, without consequence. So he kind of is saying that everything is kind of bounded together by this one it. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
and then, yeah, I don't know. It's very
It,
complicated.
yeah, yeah. And then Donald Hoffman actually, when asked in the Lex Friedman podcast what he thinks the meaning of life was, he kind of joked and said, "I'll probably regret this later," but I thought it's interesting is that he said that in a way it could be a meaning that the universe is actually experiencing itself, and the universe itself is evolving by having this consciousness.
Okay.
So he actually thinks that in a way that is the next part of like the universe is actually having awareness, like self-awareness. I guess it's just a matter of time before the particles perfectly set up that way. I don't know how that happened, but um, I mean, like you said, it is a lot of this is going to be philosophy with very minimal actual science to back it up, because you kind of get to a point where you can get a lot of data, but you can't solve the problem of consciousness with consciousness. It's like you can't touch your own fingertip with the same finger. It's like you're kind of you're almost confined to your uh, it's like a house that you can't get out of. You know what I mean? It's like you can't go beyond outside of it while you're in it. Like it's kind of, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
or
Like
I guess we can think that we see the end of the rainbow, but to actually get there is a different story entirely.
Yeah, it's like solving the hard problem of consciousness by using consciousness. You
Yes.
can't get there.
Yeah,
You
maybe
know.
not. Maybe it's the impossible question. It's not the hard question.
I mean, it might be one of the things that we never actually, of course, a lot of times when people talk about things, we say, oh, we'll never know, or well, this will never happen.
Hmm.
And as time goes on, things happen. But I honestly think that this is one of those things that we may never actually get an answer for because we are conscious. It's like you have to,
Maybe,
you know what
or
I mean?
maybe like some things we shouldn't try, or not we shouldn't try to solve. Maybe we aren't even allowed to solve. In some ways, that innocence might be bliss. What do you
Right,
think,
and
Sven?
also yeah, and also in a way that you can't like the laws of physics are set in stone. You can't change the laws of physics. You can't like mess up the entire universe order the same way. In this regard, it might somehow be a similar type of thing where it's like a property or like a principle, something like that. Where
Mhm.
it's like what's it? Yeah, some yeah.
Or I mean, maybe you can just go into like what universe sandbox and just like destroy everything or something. I don't know.
Right, right. And I mean, another thing that's interesting too is like thinking it's like of course like this is a little bit more philosophy, but it's like when it comes to consciousness, it's like of course the universe has been around for what do they say 13 billion years, and it's like of course right now in this little bit of time that we have we're alive and conscious. It's like it kind of makes me think that you can only ever have a conscious experience, you can only ever be experiencing because you can't not be experiencing. So I feel like for us to think that when we die that somehow it's like a non-experience, like an unconsciousness. I feel like that actually might not even be possible because consciousness is outside of like space and time. It's not confined within the universe. That's kind of a way to kind of step outside of the. You see what I'm saying? It's like a way to kind of step outside of space and time.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit. But I think that's a good point to end up. That maybe we
Yeah,
don't know where we're going, or we're not sure, you
we'll
know.
always be
It's,
experiencing, no matter what.
yeah, that sounds about right. I think we can be sure of that. But anyways, thank you for tuning in. Till
Yep.
next time.